Hello everyone, I am George from Ireland. So I'm going to read a poem which is composed by Keats, and Keats got together with Leigh Hunt and Shelley one evening. I'm not quite sure when or where, roughly 1820, and they hit upon a topic and said, let's all compose a sonnet on the same thing. A sonnet is a 14-line poem written to a very precise metrical format and rhyme scheme. Now, there's more than one sort of sonnet. You can have a Petrarchan sonnet, or I can't remember the other sorts of sonnets. And so I've read the other two by Shelley and Leigh Hunt. I think I've forgotten to put the Shelley one up on the channel so far. So here it is, and I'm not sure that they judged who of them composed the finest work. Let you be the judge. All right, and it's about a topic which fascinated the Western mind at the time, the Nile, because after the Napoleonic Wars, British and French people have been going there, coming back, taking artifacts. So there was a renewed flourish of interest in Egypt, in the Occident. Anyway, here it is. To the Nile by John Keats. Son of the old moon mountains, African, chief of the pyramid and the crocodile, we call thee fruitful, and that very while a desert fills our seeing's inward span. Nurse of swart nations since the world began, art thou so fruitful, or dost thou beguile such men to honour thee, who, worn with toil, rest for a space twixt Cairo and the Deccan? O may dark fancies err, they surely do. 'Tis ignorance that makes a barren waste of all beyond itself. Thou dost bedew green rushes like our rivers, and dost taste the pleasant sunrise. Green isles hast thou too, and to the sea as happily dost haste. What do you make of it? I think it's one of his feebler poems, though I derive some satisfaction from reading it. Both the musicality of it and indeed the signification of the words, son of the old moon mountains, African, because Westerners were perplexed. Where was the source of the Nile? So they were intrigued by this. They thought it might well be the Abyssinian mountains, i.e. Ethiopia. That's where the Blue Nile comes from. The White Nile joins it with Cairo. And was the White Nile further south? Yes, it was, from Lake Victoria. But Europeans didn't know that until the mid-19th century, when I think it's Sir Richard Burton got there. I think John Hanning Speke might have been with him as well. Okay, so the Moon Mountains, African, because he's inverting the order of the adjective and the noun, rather than the African Moon Mountains. It works for scansion. Moreover, they did that sort of thing in the 19th century. Chief of the pyramid and the crocodile. Well, there were loads of Nile crocodiles, but the last of them, well, in Egypt, last one was killed off ages ago in the 60s or something, because I went on a cruise down the Nile when I was little. I'd love to go back, actually. Can't go anywhere now owing to coronavirus. And yes, the pyramids are not too far from it. Not within sight, though. We call thee fruitful. Yes, well, okay, because it brings abundant life to a land that would otherwise be drought-stricken and infertile. And the very while a desert fills our seeing's inward span. But yet, there's so much desert around it. Nurse of swart nations since the world began. Swart meaning dark-skinned. A bit like, well, the word schwarz or zwart, in Dutch. Well, the first one's German. Because as though like a wet nurse bringing them up, because that's the cradle of civilization. And Europeans are aware that people had lived in Egypt, or certainly had a civilization in Egypt, for rather longer than they had done in Europe. Art thou so fruitful? That's, are you so fruitful? Well, or dost thou beguile such men to honour thee? So you seduce them, you trick them, but really you're not life-bearing. In fact, you're destructive. And there's so much desert around there, but the inundations can actually kill people and ruin their crops. Who, worn with toil, rest for a space twixt Cairo and the Deccan, because these people perform the most back-breaking work upon the banks of the Nile with their irrigation canals, trying to live from the culture of the soil. Well, they had to grow crops, but the Nile is really not benefiting them. Near Cairo in the Deccan, well, Cairo, obviously, Kahireh, being the unconquerable capital of Egypt. The Deccan, I'm not sure where that is. Somewhere there. There's a Deccan in India, a range of hills, but it's a double C. Oh, may dark fancies err. Okay, so things you want could be wrong. They surely do. 'Tis ignorance that makes a barren waste of all beyond itself. So blaming the Nile for the desert being there, that's illogical to me. And the Nile lacks knowledge. I know a persona behind the Nile, but I think even that then that's weak. Thou dost bedew green rushes like our rivers. Well, that's true. There are rushes along the banks of the rivers, such as, where Moses witnesses Moses' basket, and dost taste the pleasant sunrise. Perhaps because it's further east, it sees the sun earlier than the British Isles does. Green Isles hast thou too, and to the sea happily dost repair. Okay, so it's got eights just like Old Father Thames, and yes, it wends its way to the Mediterranean. Mediocre. Now, okay, it's better than anything I could turn my hand to, but this is one of Keats' least well-known poems. So please follow me. I've got my main channel, and donations to PayPal would be wonderful. GeorgeCallahan79 at gmail.com. Toodaloo.